President, we regret that the Albanian presidency has followed in the disastrous footsteps of its Western colleagues and has used Rule 37 to invite 5 states, Ukraine, Czech Republic, Italy, Poland, Estonia, and together with the EU that makes 6 delegations, even though it is quite obvious that there is no added value to their statements, which all follow the same general EU-NATO line. What is the point of making today's meeting an open debate if Albania intends to hold one on September 20th anyway? This approach devalues discussions in the Council. When we saw the topic on which today's meeting was requested, we were pleasantly surprised by the desire to commemorate the anniversary of the referendums on the accession of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions to Russia. Frankly, we ourselves had been thinking that it might be worth telling the Council about life in these new constituent subjects of our country. However, it seems that having declared referendums as the topic of our meeting, Albania and the United States have confused them with the current elections to the regional parliament of our new subjects, or rather they intended to use them as a pretense for new attacks on our country, even though Western countries who mentor others about so-called genuine democratic values should be better informed about various forms of the expression of popular will than anyone. We know, however, that when Western interests are at play, such minor details as referendums, elections, and the opinion of ordinary citizens in general are not taken into account by our former Western partners. That was the case in Kosovo, for example, where instead of a free expression of will, there was simply a declaration of independence adopted by an interim self-governing authorities, which had clearly exceeded their remit. Back then, the same countries which now criticize the Russian referendums argued that Kosovo had the right to secede from the Serbian state due to threat of a serious violation of the rights of Kosovo Albanians, even though by that point nothing had truly threatened them for a long time. Unlike the situation with Kosovo, the rights and the very lives of the people of Donbass, Kherson, and Zaporizhia were and continue to be under threat from the actions of the same criminal regime which since 2014 has been shelling peaceful neighborhoods and cities in Donbass, and which, with the connivance of the United States and its allies, has declared war on everything Russian and is actively promoting neo-Nazi ideologies in Ukraine. The only way to provide the residents of these regions liberated from the Kiev regime with protection and certainty in their future is through a clear legal status of these territories and their inclusion in the Russian Federation, just as in 2014 the reunification of Crimea with Russia was ensured even as Kiev unequivocally threatened that region with Ukrainization or reprisals. On September 27, 2022, the long-awaited expression of popular will took place, and its results spoke for themselves. The overwhelming majority of those who voted, 99%, the DPR, 98%, in the LPR, 93%, in Zaporizhia, and 87% in the Kherson region, made a free and informed choice in favor of our country. Despite the difficult security situation and the provocations of the Kiev regime, the overwhelming majority of voters decided to go to the polls, from 76% in the Kherson region to 97% in the DPR. The referendums were held in full compliance with the norms and principles of international law, no matter how much our Western opponents may try to prove otherwise. The decisions of these plebiscites reflect the right of peoples to self-determination, which, according to the 1970 Declaration of Principles of International Law, may take the form of the establishment of a sovereign and independent state or the free association or integration with an independent state. More than 100 international observers from Italy, Germany, Venezuela, Latvia, and other countries who followed the process also recognized the results as legitimate. For the residents of these new regions, this was not just a decision on legal status. They exercised their inalienable right to speak their native language and teach their children in that language. And on Victory Day, which is sacred for our people, to pay tribute to those who fought to liberate their land from the Nazis and not those who collaborated with them and committed horrific crimes. The people of the DPR and LPR had been waiting for that opportunity for 8 years under incessant shelling from the Kiev regime, which since 2014 had set a course for the physical extermination of undesirable residents in the southeast of the country. Ukrainian authorities openly declared Russian and Russian-speaking citizens of Donbass non-human and specimens. In one of his interviews, Vladimir Zelensky suggested that they get out of Ukraine and go to Russia. And the residents of the DPR, LPR, Kherson region, and Zaporizhia followed his cynical recommendation, returning to their homeland and taking the lands on which their ancestors had lived for centuries with them. The best testament to the voluntary accession of these territories to Russia is the active participation of their residents in the life of the country and national processes support for efforts aimed at the economic and social revival of these new Russian regions and restoring their indisputable centuries-old Russian identity. We recall the numerous prophecies about the emergence of guerrilla movements in these territories after they become part of Russia. The reality is that the only ones trying to unsuccessfully stir up trouble are a handful of saboteur groups sent in from Ukraine, which the same local residents help to identify and neutralize. This is, of course, a huge disappointment for the Zelensky regime, which now has a chance to find out how the people of Ukraine really feel about its criminal policies. Of course, the choice of former Ukrainian citizens was also influenced by the achievements of Crimea after it was reunited with Russia. Over the past 9 years, life there has changed for the better. People live without fear for their lives. The economy is developing. Infrastructure is being built. Throughout these years, we have been sincerely investing in the well-being of this region, just as we will continue contributing to the development of Donbass and other territories that Kyiv tried and continues to try to turn into ruins. It is clear that other regions of Ukraine are closely following the experience of the LPR, DPR, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions as well. They have gotten a good glimpse of the true face of the Kyiv regime over this period. It is enough to just reference the Human Rights Watch report, which admitted that Ukrainian armed forces shelled certain areas of the Kharkiv region with cluster munitions, leading to mass civilian deaths, just as the Kyiv regime at one time fired on Bucha near Kyiv, later tried to pass off civilian casualties of the shelling as victims of Russian occupiers and laying out the bodies on the streets of the village. It is no surprise that as our Russian troops approach the Kupiansky district, the local administration has admitted that nearly all its residents refuse to evacuate and prefer to wait for our soldiers. And in general, the majority of Ukrainians understand full well that the threat to them comes not from Russia's actions, but from the criminal policies of the Zelensky regime. Currently, this is taking the form of the mass drafting of soldiers, which has long been called conscription to the grave in Ukraine. The fact is that, as is well known, NATO is waging a hybrid war in Ukraine with Russia to the last Ukrainian, and they're already beginning to run out of Ukrainians after a failed counter-offensive. Ukrainians no longer want to end up in a meat grinder, and draft officers are trying to catch anyone they can on the streets. Information has emerged that the EU is ready to extradite men of military age to Kyiv, thereby once again flouting its own principles and values. Ukrainian men quickly realize this, and a campaign is gaining momentum on social network advocating to move refugees to Russia, where several million Ukrainians have already found shelter. Further comments are unnecessary. Dear colleagues, new regions are actively integrating into our country's life. We have approved a comprehensive program for the socioeconomic development of these federal subjects, which includes rebuilding infrastructure, implementing federal programs and projects, implementing social support measures, relaunching key industries and businesses, rebuilding production facilities, and creating conditions for further growth, and most importantly, improving the well-being of citizens and protecting their rights. Russia has consistently addressed the problems and will continue to address the problems that have accumulated in these regions during the time they were not part of this our country. In 2023, more than 700 kilometers of road were repaired, 177 educational institutions rebuilt, and on September 1st, more than 1,250 schools began operating in the 4 new regions. Liberated Mariupol, which still remembers the brutal crimes of Ukrainian nationalists, is actively being rebuilt. On September 1st, the grand openings of 2 universities as well as 25 schools and 26 kindergartens were commemorating, including a new modern school built from scratch for 1,100 students. Of course, in order for these 4 regions to fully integrate into Russia legally and administratively, they need normal authorities that have the same powers as in other subjects of the Russian Federation. From today and until September 10th, which is the single general voting day across our country, elections of representatives to regional parliaments and municipal bodies are taking place across all polling stations, and residents' active political stance can already be seen based on the results of early and extraterritorial voting. Organizers and participants of the electoral process have to deal with the most severe conditions of endless shelling and provocations from Ukraine. From August 31st to September 4th alone, Ukrainian armed forces fired at the Donetsk metropolitan area over 120 times using 50 high-millimeter Western-style shells, including cluster ammunitions. As a result, 63 men and women were wounded, and a 6-year-old girl died in the Kyiv region of Donetsk. This is, of course, not something any of our Western colleagues have mentioned today. Despite threats to their lives, election commission workers are being sent to villages and hamlets where fighting is currently ongoing. In the DPR, these groups have traveled to the most dangerous settlements, Gorlovka, Volnovacha, Yasinovatia, and several areas of Donetsk and Makiivka. Western countries and the UN Secretariat are well aware of these place names, but they bashfully prefer not to mention them, whereas in our country they resonate with the pain of hundreds of civilians killed and injured, killed by Western long-range weapons in their own homes, in shops and cafes, in public places, in other words, in civilian facilities near which there are no military targets. A responsibility for their deaths lies not only with the Kiev regime, but also with its Western sponsors who supply artillery systems and other heavy weapons to Ukrainian nationalists. They are also making a tidy profit from others' misfortune in this, and therefore are not interested in a peaceful solution to the Ukrainian crisis. We will address this again at the next council meeting on September 12th. Dear colleagues, it is the inhuman crimes of the Kiev regime, its maniacal and hopeless desire to deprive the Russian people of their Russian identity, that became the main reason due to which the residents of Donbass, Lugansk, and Zaporizhia are actively and consciously voting for their future together with Russia. Kiev lost them in the same way as it lost Crimea, having drawn no conclusions from its obvious mistakes. We see that it is unable to draw no conclusions even now, bringing its inglorious and inevitable end closer. Mr. President, some Western delegations and UN Secretariat representatives mentioned yesterday's strike on Konstantinovka in the DNR. This is indeed a horrific crime. As a result of the rocket strike on a market, 16 people died and 32 were injured. But we're convinced that you will soon forget about this incident, having understood, just as was the case on the Kramatorsk strike in April last year, what a horrific crime and a horrible provocation carried out by Ukraine you're covering up for. You don't need to be a ballistic expert to be able to use the available video materials which have been posted by the Zelensky themselves to show that the missile came from a direction where there are only Ukrainian positions. And Western media, having disseminated this video, they quickly begin to editing the video where the rocket hits a car and shows the direction where it came from. However, it was too late and the truth came out. Another horrific lie that the Western media is using to cover up Ukrainian provocations, and which traditionally are tied to the visit of a high-ranking official, in this case Anthony Blinken. We are sure that this was carried out in order to give the dying regime a new dose of finance and weapons. This was the same pattern behind the vile provocation in Bucha, and there will no doubt be further Nazi-style incidents in the future. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation